This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by Sillitoe, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. You're hearing my voice right now through the beautiful Roswell Pro Audio Aztec tube microphone, mixed through Sillitoe, Ozone, RX, and Neutron, all on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. Also, please remember to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
The biggest thing that I want to say is like a vinyl record is literally an analog hard drive. It's just encoded information. Like the grooves are information that gets encoded in, and then you have to have a playback system to play that back out. So I call it the caveman hard drive. Instead of spinning at, 7,000 and, RPM, it spins at 33 and a third RPM, or 45. If you just have a disc alone without the encode system and the playback system, they're useless. Like you have to have a way to encode it and decode it, just like we do with computers. It's the same idea, right?
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. At Sillitoe, tone shaping is topping the charts. Meet the Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Plasma's flux saturation technology brings dynamic warmth and depth to your mix. Aurora takes spatial audio to new heights with lush adaptive reverb, while Cascadia adds exciting delays to your mix, retaining clarity through its smart unmasking feature. Get 10% off Plasma, Aurora, Cascadia, or any of the Sillitoe plugins with the special code ROCK10 and make your mixes rock at isotope.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today here at Podzilla Studios, actually for our first ever video interview right here at Podzilla, is Duncan Ferguson, a mastering engineer based in East Nashville with a true passion for critical listening and collecting all kinds of recordings. Duncan got into mastering naturally and has earned the nickname the music librarian from his close friends. Over the years, he honed his skills to bring music to life across all listening applications. Duncan's mastering studio, the Voltage Exchange, which is right around the corner from here, is all about solving problems for clients. After seeing the shifts in the music industry over the past decade, he's focused on offering solutions for artists, producers, and mixing engineers while making the process as seamless as possible. Duncan believes in collaboration and transparent relationships. Fascinating. He loves having clients present during sessions and sharing his techniques, equipment, and choices to ensure their true vision shines through. It all sounds very all-encompassing, but I totally get it in the whole process of working and making records. As someone who also collects vinyl, Duncan offers a full-service in-house vinyl mastering and disc cutting with the new Sillitoe lathe. We'll have to find out what that's all about. Duncan's mastering studio, as I said, is right nearby here in East Nashville. I met Duncan, I think the first time around was SAE, an event that was happening there. And then we got to spend an amazing weekend with a group of rock stars here, hanging out at the Toy Box studio with Colin Dupuis for an awesome mixing weekend, which was a lot of fun too.
It was so much fun. Yeah.
So please welcome Duncan Ferguson to Recording Studio Rockstars. Duncan, are you ready to rock, dude?
Oh man, I was born ready.
It's awesome to have you here, man. Again, this is our first test run here in the studio. You look great. I'm checking us out on the video, make sure we look right on the playback, and it seems to be all rolling. Rockstars, drop a comment in and let us know what you think of the look of the whole new studio. How have you been, dude? I think you just got off like a power weekend. I mean, this will show up later, so we don't have to get too granular on the date or something. But
we just finished I just came off of the Welcome to 1979 Recording Summit, and that was my 7th year going. And they, Chris Mara and Yoli Mara at Welcome to 1979 put on this awesome weekend full of just industry professionals and other networking opportunities. You've been to a few, I think, right?
Yeah, I've been to a few. I've been on some panels there too, and I've just gone and watched it. And there's something. So it's an event, Rockstars, that takes place at Welcome to 1979 studio here in Nashville, and they will annually in the month of November host a weekend with a group of panelists in different rooms. They can set up. I guess there's 2 big rooms, plus there's a mastering room. So there might be a few different little panels or clinics going on, but it'll be up to 60 people. I think they limited it 60.
Yeah. Yeah. You can sign up over the year, and it's a weekend just full of awesome things. They do a live to disc recording on Friday night. And then there's some panels over the course of each day that you can choose to go to. It's kind of hard. It's kind of like being at Bonnaroo where you're like, I don't know what stage to choose.
Right. Yeah, exactly. You're trying to figure out what to do next.
Yeah. And then they do like a listening party on Saturday nights where they pick a record, you listen to the record, and then somebody who worked on the record extensively talks about their time, working on the record and tells how they made it. And all that. It's pretty.
Yeah, that's a fun part. So that's the Saturday night one where it's like it's more of a listening party. You listen to the record, but then the producer or the engineer just tells the whole story of what it was like to make that record.
Yeah.
Which, I'll be honest, that's something I always thought would be really fun to do for the podcast here, but I was terrified of the copyright stuff where I'm like, I don't even want to mess with it to have a team of lawyers to clear the rights on something because it's published, because this is published.
Chris goes out of his way to say like, I think his saying is don't tweet the deets, like it's like you're paying to be there and have the experience, and the experience stays there, and it allows that person to be able to talk about things transparently. Not in any weird way, but like they are able to talk about the experience and how they had to like problem solve to make the record.
Yeah, totally.
And they can do that openly without being worried about somebody posting it on social media or anything like that. And it's really, for us industry professionals, it's like really, we have either you're assimilating to something, an experience that you've had similar and they're talking about like large record, like very large records, or you're like, you learn something that you can bring home and use to try and get somebody's record across the finish line,
Yeah. And similar to this podcast, I started it because I always loved all the stories you would hear in the control room, hanging out with people. And of course, when you're working with people and you're making records together, it can be a pretty intimate experience. So which means that, people really open up and you really start telling some stories and you hear some great behind the scenes stories. And you're absolutely right. For like a video podcast, for a live one, it's like you can only get so deep, at least until everybody's dead. Something. And all is revealed.
Well, when I do attendance sessions too, I tell the artist a big thing about my whole thing is I say like, think of me like think of me like a lawyer. My dad was an attorney, and you like this when you're in my mastering space, the record's not out yet, so. And everything that's here is it's like you kind of have that confidentiality, like the lawyer, like that. I'm blanking on the term, but
attorney-client privilege.
Attorney-client privilege, yes.
You have like mastering client privilege.
Yeah, mastering client privilege.
Studio client privilege.
I was like, the record's not out yet. Everything we say and do in here, this is a safe place. You may see me, like shift something or do something or, but it, like you are the boss and, like you can say anything you want. Like I say, like, was there anything, I always ask people who come in for attendance sessions, like, is there anything in this process that really like bugged you, and you were fighting the whole way? Or was there anything in this process that was just super easy? And it kind of can inform me how to like, work with stuff in its final state to get it into the format. And it's actually really, those sort of questions are really helpful, but sometimes people are afraid to like, because of the politics of some things or whatever, they're afraid to talk about it. So I just always say, hey, this is a safe place, and Chris really goes, I think tying that all back in, Chris really goes out of his way to like, try to have the summit feel that way as well.
This right now is not a safe place. It's just totally like, I'm just trying to like trip us up the whole time.
No,
just kidding.
Yeah.
But but I agree with that. And I know that the process that you're describing of making a record with people, like your website,
Yeah.
the language you use, you really do focus on that kind of communication. You use the term safe space.
Yeah.
Just this concept of when you make music, there's like great music, at least I believe, and hopefully great music for any one of us who are making music is a process of being comfortable enough to be vulnerable and like open yourself up, because I think we create and communicate better emotional, creativity. We have better ideas when we can just really let ourselves through. And because of that, right, would you say that there's a tendency for people to be protective?
Yeah, they're a bit guarded about like how they get perceived by the outside world, I think, and we as like people who are helping them create their vision have to be, have to be mindful of that, but then also help them communicate it too at the same time. So.
And one of the things that is interesting to me too is this idea that there are all kinds of music creators out there. There's all kinds of artists and bands, and there's different styles. And, you can have, on the one hand, you could have an artist that comes in as like, I don't care about nothing. I don't care what people think of this, that, and the other thing. And that's totally appropriate for the music. It can be like bombastic and loud and like irreverent and impervious to criticism. But then on the other hand, you can have a style of music and an artist that is totally has a fragility to it, you know, that it could just like come apart really easily if it's done the wrong way. I think everybody's got to have a pretty tough skin to get out there in public and perform.
Sure.
But that's a different topic too. The record making process wouldn't you say that there's a slight difference in that respect? Like when you're in the studio, you need to be able to make the mistake and it's okay, right?
I think with sort of like I've spent a lot of time sort of writing about like how the studio has really become an instrument on its own, and I think
writing about it like blog writing.
It was kind of my thesis in my undergraduate. I did like a long paper of like 100-page like sort of. It was
really?
Part of my it was part of that was a long time ago. I have to like remember but I wrote a thing about how the recording studio sort of became its own instrument, like the recording studio as a actual production like a tool for creation. And I used examples from 1980 to 1995 and stuck to those specific years of like the modern recording studio coming into existence as known as the modern recording studio, I think the tools that we have nowadays have allowed us to create this. We can go beyond reality, in performance. So like we can express things, which is what's so exciting. We can express things that are you can't necessarily express on stage. Just
right.
You know what I mean? Like we have all these tools to now like expand like a virtual reality, even just with stereo, and it's been that way for, like we've been pushing the envelope for, 40 years doing that. But that sort of thing is people can express themselves in different ways that they can't express, like just with one single performance.
Yeah. And you can discover.
Discover. Yeah.
Discover. I mean, you can discover on stage too, well, so rewinding a little bit, that process of talking about the importance of communication and stuff like that in your mastering studio and process seems very related to, potentially certain styles of music that you might work with or certain types of artists that you work with. Do you think that's accurate? Also, I wanted to point something out. So you can't quite see it on the video, but now that we're on video, we can show stuff up.
Sure.
Like, check out my nice mug, But Duncan, when he was here for the mixing mastermind weekend that we did with Colin Dupuis at the Toy Box studio, he brought what he's holding right now, which is this great. I think he brought that, right?
Yeah.
It's this great, like, what is it? It looks like a piece of paper, but it's really like a tablet, a digital thing.
It's changed my life completely. It's the Remarkable Pro Pad.
Yeah, hold it up to the camera, and then you can see it. Yeah, there you go.
And you can write It's literally just, it's the same. I think
I just made you hold your personal notes up.
No, you're fine. I don't have
that.
You're totally, it's the same. I think it's the same. Don't quote me on this. I think it's the same technology as the Kindle,
Right.
but it's got a writable.
Oh yeah. Digital ink.
Digital ink. Yeah. And it's like an Etch-a-Sketch, sort of a really complicated Etch-a-Sketch technology.
So it's got like a feel to it when you run.
Yeah.
And so it looks like it's
kind of feels like paper.
The black thing's sort of a pencil.
Yeah. And so you could just write on it, and it feels almost like paper. I think it's a little more slippery, but if you've ever tried to write with an iPad pencil, that's really slippery because the screen's so smooth. Totally. You know. And but this, I can actually capture my handwriting pretty accurately, you know, with certain finesse.
What if you're like me and your handwriting kind of sucks? Is that still a good thing?
No, I think you could work on it. You could do the cursive. I still, I went through this thing in high school where my handwriting got so atrocious that my OCD sort of kicked in. I'm like, I got to fix this. So
Did you go back to your first grade notebooks?
I was like,
and practice your cursive letters? I
made my handwriting actually look really nice just because it was bothering me. So kind of stuck to that.
So I have an iPad in the studio with the Apple Pencil, and it's not the latest one. It's probably a generation ago or whatever. But I was doing an audiobook recently, and it was totally great for that. I had to follow along on a manuscript the whole time.
Yeah.
And then take these real-time notes during the entire reading for every time there was a stop and a do-over and all this, take numbers and all that. And it was really handy for that. But also occasionally I'm like, it's not working. It's like the Wi-Fi will stop or whatever Bluetooth thing that it's using. And so, I'm all about the pencil and the podcast just because I'm like, it almost never fails.
That never, they don't, it's kind of a solid redundancy. It just doesn't break.
Right. So, does that one actually, is it pretty reliable?
It's been fairly reliable. There's been a few little things to sort of overcome, but I haven't had, I used it for my notes this weekend, when
you were at the event?
Yeah, the battery life is great. Actually, I haven't charged it since I'm on 3. It's got those little 5. I haven't charged it yet, and I'm still like I got a half a battery left. So
nice.
It's pretty awesome. What it's really changed my life for is I really struggled personally, and this is maybe a personal thing. Maybe other people don't struggle with this, but using a digital calendar.
This is a safe space.
Okay. I struggle using a digital calendar, and when I put things in the calendar, my brain doesn't want to go back and look at it. Or there's some sort of disconnect. But when I write it down, I can remember, and then I have to go back and look, and it's just it causes me to be on top of that this sort of physical interaction causes me to be on top of it. So I used to, in a really nerdy way, I used to just carry 3-ring binders around with day pages.
I used to do the day planner. That was back in the day before we had the phone version of everything.
And anyway, so
my doodles were much better when I had a day planner. I have no doodles in my iPhone.
Totally,
I got no doodles.
And so now I upload you can upload PDFs to this, and then I just write over it. So this is like my day. I have like my studio logo.
That looks cool. That looks cool. So by the way, if you want your camera to focus on it, you have to cover your eyes.
Okay.
It's very, very nerdy. There you go.
Yeah. So I have my studio logo, and then I have a day to-do list where I write in, and then I have my week outlook, and I just write in what I want.
Right. Just after I told you it's a safe space, I'm like, cover your face.
Nah. So.
Well, that's cool. Yeah. So let's riff on that for just a sec, because I think the rock stars will appreciate the challenge of organization, note taking, calendars and stuff like that. What do you want to say about operating your studio? So your studio is, I know we're just jumping right into stuff.
Yeah,
something about the video podcast makes me want to just get right to it.
Let's go. Yeah.
But the Voltage Exchange is your mastering studio.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful place. Lots to talk about that. But organizing and scheduling and knowing what's what, and as you said, communication is an important part. So what are some tools or tips for you that you use that help you manage, let's just say, the calendar to start?
Sure. Actually, this is kind of like my central hub. I get up, it's actually more of, it's not so much there are a million tools out there, right? We live in the age of, being blasted with productivity,
plugins.
Yeah. But just getting up in the morning and then writing out my day before I start. You know, like I'm an early riser, and I actually go into my studio really early while my ears are fresh and just knock out the audio stuff, and then I do my admin in the afternoon.
That's a fascinating idea. You know, back when I built my studio and I had analog tape machines, I had this mixing console that did Hotel California that was designed by G. Parned. And when I acquired that, his widow, Carla Harned, messaged me and said, oh, by the way, I have Jeep's personal 2-track machine, and, you know, that comes with the deal. So if you want to come get it, you can come pick it up. So I did a 4-day drive out to Colorado, Durango, Colorado, from Nashville, with a minivan, and picked it up and spent a night. She generously let me just stay there for a night and, you know, pick it up and drive home the next day. And I got to see Jeep's grave was right there at the house with the gravestone that is made from an MCI 24 track. Oh my gosh. Steve Sadler actually sent there. What
an amazing piece of history to have that all.
It was amazing.
I'm a history nerd, so I love that stuff. I absolutely love that stuff. So.
Well, so Carla was just incredibly organized. I couldn't believe it. Like, it immediately struck me when I was in the house. Just even walking through the garage, I was like, wow. Every wall is like high wire shelves with clear storage bins on them that are all labeled. I'm like, this is like, I'm getting excited, you know?
I have a little tech shop in the garage, and my tech shop is exactly that. I have to be that way because I just have all these like little, you know, especially with getting the lathe now, I have to do my own servicing, you know, so it's like resistors, like all the, you know, soldering iron, like all that stuff. So it's,
yeah. And I think maybe I saw that over at your place too. It was a cool spot. Native Instruments introduces the new Complete 15 bundle featuring Contact 8, offering versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative effects. Perfect for creating everything from emotional scores to dance floor grooves. Contact 8 includes exciting new creative tools like chords and phrases for inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth sounds. The Complete 15 bundle also includes updated Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro and AI-enhanced Isotope Ozone 11. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. And I desperately need that because I have just so much stuff. You know, I have collectitis. But I wanted to finish this thought too. So with Carla, in the morning when I met her for, you know, coffee, orange juice, breakfast or whatever, I noticed like the table was set out, and then she had this little list of paper right next to her breakfast thing. Yes. And it just had a list of stuff she was going to do that day. And I was like, that was the first time I ever saw that. And I was like, wow, that's cool. That's like, you know exactly what you're going to be doing. You're up early, and it's like, there's my day.
Yeah. That's literally the only, like, it's not anything special, not any, I mean, other than this, you know, like using a piece of technology to do it, but that's the key is just having, I call it, I'm really nerdy. I'm a space nerd.
Aerospace?
Like, yeah, just like, I love the history of like, the NASA and all that. But
we're so close to Huntsville, Alabama.
Yeah. With the museum and all I call this little template my flight plan for the morning, you know, for the day. So that's my flight plan. And so I make a flight plan almost exactly like you would make a flight plan as a pilot. It's labeled flight plan, you know, and it just makes me feel a little more like, oh, I'm doing something important, you know.
Now, let me ask you this. How do you balance the flight plan you need to have today, you need to know it today about next Tuesday versus waking up Tuesday morning and making your flight plan?
Correct. So like I have a today to-do list of like, and in the morning I kind of prioritize like this has to be done today. And then if it doesn't, I have like a week outlook and like, oh, maybe I can move that to tomorrow, or I have these appointments. So I can kind of like look at the week outlook. And then kind of like, the cool thing about this technology is it doesn't get lost on a piece of paper and then I can like copy paste yesterday over to today. If I don't like, that's like been the game changer. So I don't have to like rewrite everything. And it's so,
And even if you lost that whole thing, like
Yeah.
let's say you just left it here at the studio by accident, I was like, no, I didn't see anything. You could get another one and then you just log in.
Yeah, there's an iPhone app that like everything syncs to the apps, and then it's like then there's a desktop app. And what was the most amazing thing is I was online teaching, which we'll probably talk about in a bit, but I drew something like a diagram of trying to explain like some room acoustic stuff. And I drew it on this pad and it synced in like a few seconds. And then I went on the desktop app and I'm on Zoom and I grabbed the drawing
and just
slide it right exported it as a PDF off of the app and then just opened it up on Zoom. And like I did it in like 30 seconds.
That's pretty
after
good.
drawing. And it was like, whoa. And I did it like untested. Like I was like, I think I can do this. And I just did it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like it was, so.
I'm going to beat that. Watch this.
Yeah, okay.
I just drew a smiley face.
Yeah.
It's already live.
It's already up.
It's already live.
It's like the analog.
You probably couldn't see
it. No. Yeah.
No, that stuff's really cool. And I do love that. Now, what about your calendar? What are the tools that you find are really useful as far as something's in your calendar?
I do have a
who's booked and
Google
what's needed.
Google Calendar that so on my website I have like you can book a session, and I have like 4 different calendars on there that you can choose from, and then they're all sort of like funneled down, and that goes into my Google Calendar, and that's just like I look at the big things there, and then I just transfer that over to I have like a monthly calendar on this with my flight plan, and then I just have a day sheet that then has a day outlook and a week outlook, and I just sort of start with that big thing and funnel it down.
So the calendar stuff goes on the calendar as far as sessions, and then what you write down is more the granular level of what what does that mean for today kind of stuff.
It's not like revolutionary, I don't think, but it's a way that I can kind of like step by step keep it organized.
I got to be honest, I don't think revolutions are not what we want with some of this stuff. I mean, I know that sounds counterintuitive, but when I say that, what I'm referring to is this idea of like, when I go to use reliable tools for things like an email or a calendar, I kind of don't want the newest, latest thing because I don't know if it's going to be there next year.
That is that is an amazing point. And that actually is what I've struggled with too, of like with a paper and pen, it's like, well, that's just always going to be there, you know, like, but like, I've really struggled with like, I think my wife and we had like an app that remind us to do certain things around the house, and the app doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And
I've dealt with that too.
Yeah. So like,
some kind of special list app.
Yeah.
It's almost like, I mean, sometimes I'm like, whichever one is doing the most promotion, I'm like, I don't know if they're going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. That's probably not fair.
Yeah.
But but I've messed with all that stuff, and I find, so I use an app for calendar stuff called Fantastical.
Okay.
And it is pretty flexible. I think it's a company called FlexBits, but it's pretty flexible, and it works. I can't even spell it. It works pretty great, but it'll collect calendars from different things. And the reason I got it and started using it a while ago on my iPhone was because you can just verbally say into the thing, like 5 a.m. Monday, do this thing, whatever.
Oh, it's
and it
like
kind of,
voice.
you see all the things like go down into the different zones. So it automatically like populates it. Cause I would find that when I tried to use the built-in one on my phone, it wasn't fast enough.
Yeah.
I just need cause I'm in the car. Like somebody just called and they're like, yeah, let's do it next Tuesday at 7. You're like, if I don't put it in my phone right that second, it's a goner, and I'm going to blow that whole thing.
I mean, the writing down is like, if I don't write it down this second, it's gone, and I can write down fast, and I can like type, or find the app or all that, it's like, it's just there.
Yeah.
I'm really interested. The voice thing is really, really interesting because I'm starting to get into Chat GPT pretty heavily.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, we were on an AI panel together, Rockstars, recently at SAE Institute.
And I'm really, really getting intrigued by the voice. The mobile app has the voice thing now. Where
you can just have a conversation back and forth.
Yeah.
I know I spent more time trying to explain that it shouldn't keep being so long-winded and replying to me. I was like,
you're telling it to be short.
I'm just like, you gotta shut up, dude. I'm just like, I can't think about what you just gave me as an answer because you're still talking.
The scary thing is like they tell you to talk to it like a real person.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's a little like eerie to be like, I know I'm not talking to a person, but I got to talk to it like a person. And it's like, so.
I think it's fascinating. It's fun. So the ChatGPT topic, not a brand new one by the time this video comes out. However, my use of it is kind of more brand new for me. I find it incredibly helpful in assisting me on the stuff that I don't think I'm all that great at. You may or may not notice that I've got reading glasses here.
Yeah.
So it's actually a challenge for me to write and read without it being kind of exhausting and easy for me to make mistakes.
Yes.
And so I've started doing things like I'll write an email or I'll try the voice to text, and then I'll copy that, put it in ChatGPT and say like, I don't even have to ask anymore. I'm just paste it in. It's like, oh yeah, he wants me to clean it up again. And then it makes it look better.
Yeah. For some reason, like I'm moving so fast that my spelling is just absolutely horrendous. So that's like for 101, like email, like don't change the email, just, all that sort of, like just clean this up. Right?
Yeah.
So.
All right. Well, this is not strictly a like how to be productive in your home business office podcast. We'll pivot from there, but good takeaways. Yeah. I like that writing down the list at the beginning of the day thing. That's a cool idea.
It just clarifies the day and you remember it.
Yeah. So let's jump over to the voltage exchange.
Sure.
When we go to the website, we've actually got it up here on the, I'll try, you know what, at the risk of blowing it on the video, I'm going to try the screen share.
Let's do it.
What happens here.
I'm with you.
And hopefully I don't share the wrong one. So, not that one, not that one, not that one, not that one. Anyway, I'll start describing your website while I'm figuring out where to find it. Is that home new? Maybe that's it. Yeah, that looks like that's it. Okay, great. So Rockstars, hopefully you can see, this is like what his website looks like right here for the voltage exchange. Gorgeous looking, really nice. You got a great photo, you organize stuff. It kind of,
I have to get new photos. Those are starting to get, keeping up with your own, like over the years.
Oh yeah, especially when you look like me and you've got these crazy beards and long hair and stuff, and then you shave it all off and people are like, wait, is that the same guy? But like here you've got a couple of buttons on your website. Immediately it says book a session, send a message. And on Rockstars who are listening on the podcast, I'll explain everything we're looking at too.
Sure.
But talk a little bit about, your thoughts on creating a website. What did you learn about how the Rockstars could do that themselves for their studio? And then your intention with the process, because I see there's this big button at the top,
The website is really just like my whole experience is I'm sort of transitioning from being word of mouth into being searchable and all, if you don't know me, you can still book me and find me. I'm sort of in that crazy transition of I've always been word of mouth, and then now I'm transitioning hard over. Right,
you're trying to level up.
Yeah, and what I've found is just having the website is really just a quick business card, and you want to create on the front page immediately just create something where people can just access you. You have just a bit of information, but then and the way that I have branded my business, not company, but myself is, I want you to have transparent access in some way, shape, or form professionally,
Right.
So just having stuff immediately available where you feel comfortable. Oh, I can dive right in and do X, Y, and Z is really, really important. Not having to dig through things at all.
So to reiterate that, it might be common for people to have an experience where they're like, mastering is a little bit of a mystery.
Yes.
I'm not sure what it is. But I know that I need it. I feel like that's a topic you would hear. And so maybe your attitude is when you come to my website, I want to take the mystery out of it instead of leaving you feeling like it's like
you should help me. You should help me curate the website. That's perfect.
This is it. We're doing it right now, I guess, right? Very cool. So then the button book a session. What would happen next for somebody?
If you click on that, it brings you to 4 calendars. And I offer for slightly different services. and with each one of those calendars, there's a slightly different form that you can fill out. And it's one of the calendars is just for digital mastering, and one of the and then the few for a single, like if you're doing just a single song, and there's a form for that just is curated to just doing one song. And then there's a calendar that's there with a slightly different form for doing whole albums or longer EPs. And there's a slightly different form where it has an intake, different songs. And if you have ISRC codes, those sort of other parameters that are catered to more longer format albums or more groupings of songs. And then there's one calendar for vinyl mastering that encompasses the complexity of the details that we need to get a product onto lacquer.
So to say that back, you've got some people that just need a digital master
for a single song.
Some people have a whole record. Some people want to make a vinyl record.
Yeah.
And what was the other one?
The fourth one is I'm actually considering everything's always an experiment. The fourth one is actually creating a reference lacquer too as well. And I'm actually considering getting rid of that calendar because I can encompass it in the other calendars.
What would be the reason for them to have different calendars? And if it just gets if the questions are getting too into the weeds, we don't need to go there. But
it's actually to help me organize. Each calendar has a slightly different form,
right?
That you can click into, and they all for vinyl information. For vinyl, if I'm just this is really complicated, but a lot of times for the vinyl stuff that I work on, I'm actually the mastering engineer. And I walk the client or the artist or whoever it may be through the whole process, all the way through. I go all the way up to plating, and then I hand them over and I help them through the test pressing process. But I hand the client to a pressing plant of their choice, and I have two really great pressing plants here in town that I work with. Equally,
you can give them a shout out right here if you want.
There's PMP Physical Music Products. I think you've had Piper on the show before. She runs that, and she's another wonderful mastering engineer. And
that's Piper Payne.
Piper Payne. She has her lead press operator is Colby, who's also her mastering assistant. I just want to give a shout out to them. They've just been absolutely wonderful people to work with and work through things. And then also the Vinyl Lab here in Nashville as well with Scott Lay Masters and his team, also an exceptional team as well. And each pressing plant offers slightly different products and different types of service depending on what you're looking for. And I don't think there's a one size fits all.
Yeah.
And depending on what your needs are, one may have a product that works really well for your needs, and the other may have a product that works really well for what you need. Piper does a lot of really customized colors on their vinyl, so that would be the place to go if you're looking for if you just want to customize something deeply. Whereas the Vinyl Lab is they have other in terms of efficiency things that allow you to get through the if you just want to. I need X, Y, and Z, and I need it. They're really, really have some awesome systems set up. So it's a customized versus a system thing is. Anyway, so yeah.
Okay, cool.
I hope that's helpful. I don't want to, they're both awesome.
No,
and
this
they
is
can
great.
do.
This is great. Let's let's pick a real world scenario.
Sure.
So I have a record out called Skadoosh.
Yes.
It's my instrumental album.
Yeah.
It's all the music that I've put on this podcast now. Took me a while to actually release it as a record. The running joke for me is that we had over 2 million downloads of the podcast so far, and I'd put the music in it, but I hadn't released it. So I was like, okay, now that I'm double platinum, I might as well release the record.
That's amazing.
So I did that, which was a lot of fun, and we did a weekend here where, I had mixed it myself, but then we did a mastermind weekend here where a group came in and we went over to Sterling Sound and actually mastered the record with Ryan Smith and got to sit there, and he showed us how it was done. It was a lot of fun, and the record came out, sounds awesome. But next stage for me would be okay, I think I should do a vinyl copy of it and make that available for you, the rock stars. And so if I was to do that, what would that process look like? I'm showing up, I'm like, I've already mastered it as digital. Would we use that master? Would we start over? How does that stuff work?
I can be as transparent. I don't create technically I don't create like a separate master for vinyl, but I do have a slightly separate one. Like I keep my, like if I'm making any EQ moves or compression moves or like the general sonics of the record, I keep the same. Whatever goes up digitally and whatever goes on the vinyl sonically are as close as possible. So I believe in that one thing of one master fits all.
Yeah.
Trying to, but to get stuff onto a lacquer is a little more trickier than just, making a digital file. So I actually have my vinyl masters don't have the heavy limiting that we do just to have things be loud for digital release.
Right.
So I have a process that I work on where I do all of the sonic shaping up to a certain point, and then just the loudness stuff is different between the two, because what people don't, I think if you're just not, people don't understand, like a lacquer is just, you're sort of in the tape world,
right,
where you're working at a 0 VU level and not at a 0 dBFS level. And those are drastically different scales.
Right.
So like disc level is centered around 0 VU, which in the real world, depending on what you're working with, is your minus 14 on a dBFS meter.
Right. Right.
So if you sent me a digitally loud file for me to cut, I have to turn it down 14, turn it down to minus 14 to even start. So,
right.
Yeah.
Right. Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins and Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. Preferably, you want one that's not quite digitally loud, like maybe it's pre-limited. Do you think a typical, in my example, for where it was mastered, do you think that part of the process would have been sculpting it and then at the last stage going through a final limiting, which makes things louder, and maybe it's possible to undo that back step one level?
That's kind of in general what I'm doing. There's a little more finesse to that too, because some of the times the limiting can add something, that some excitement, like depending on what we're doing.
Well, it definitely did in my record. It sounds pretty awesome. At least I loved it.
And like, because we're lopping off at the end, we're lopping off a fair amount of transient information. Sometimes the way that we lop that off can actually be pleasing in some way, shape, or form. So it's sort of figuring out kind of what we're, what's going to work best, and how to get the vinyl and the digital to like resemble each other in some way, shape, or form. And so it's exactly that process in general is sort of what I'm finding out now. This is all, nothing is right and wrong. And my process may be different in 3 years as I experiment more.
Well, I think that's an important part of what we do in making records is we just keep, iterating and evolving and trying to level up how we do stuff,
I think that's what I enjoy about this too, is it's like, my job is sometimes so technical, but in the end, everything's subjective.
Yeah. Like, so let's see. So I or somebody who's already got something, they're like, "Ooh, I want to come make a vinyl record with you," would potentially have created a master for digital release. And if we were smart, in the same way that we might create a no vocal mix, if we were smart, we might actually create a no limited master.
Yeah, that's
and then
essentially
have that like in our back pocket, in the same way that when we turn in a mix to mastering, we might have a limited mix that we listen to, but then we do a no limit mix that goes to mastering. So there's a little more room to breathe.
Correct. That's sort of what I've found is kind of now that the vinyl world is sort of like ramped up again, I've found that's becoming a common trend for the guys, for the people who are cutting lacquer is that sort of workflow a little bit.
Yeah.
And now I say that I may get an email from a few lacquer cutters who are like, that's not at all what I do.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So, but yeah.
Well, hopefully everybody.
So I apologize.
Their own style and
Yeah.
their own way of doing things.
But that's something that I've found, and I found it in a few other situations that have been really helpful for me learning how to do this as well. And it just comes down to that the way that the cutter head works on a cutting lathe, it can't cut a square wave. Like it's just like magnetic tape, where like your current is all moving from 180 degrees up to 180 degrees down, and that's an arc, and a cutter head's designed to cut the arc, as opposed to cutting like just a squared off version of it. It's really difficult to because it's a.
Can't you just get a better cutter head?
It's a non-linear medium, so it's analog. It's smoother. It's difficult for us to cut really, really limited material well, and have it sound like the original material is in digital, and have it be enveloping and exciting. Yeah, I can cut heavy limited material that's square wave, but I gotta cut it in a way where it won't be exciting. Right.
Right.
So
if something already is limited and has been mastered once, then what would you do? What if you couldn't go back and get the unlimited version?
With my own stuff, and if I have a little bit of flexibility, and if it's coming from another mastering engineer, I'm working on this thing where I'm working with other mastering engineers that I know really well, and in town, a lot of them are in town. They're great colleagues, and I'm kind of working with them to be like to send me that sort of if it is. Because sometimes you can get stuff that's not limited and it's still limited because the mix engineer,
right? Yeah.
And so like I'll take their master and I'll look at it and say, okay, how do I match this? But how do I make it in a way that I can cut it easier? And so like I've been diving a lot into like expansion, for like some ways to get transients back,
right? To bring a little dynamic back into a recording.
And there's this thing of like you can turn stuff down and re-EQ it, and you add it just by doing that alone, and you print it, you see like a transient come back, and it's like a hack, it's like a transient come back from that processing.
Interesting.
So,
are there any particular tools that are really helpful when it comes to expanding stuff like that?
Oh man, I'm transparent and I'll reveal everything. I've really been, we all know that, that an expander and a compressor are exactly the same thing. They just work in reverse of each other, right? You have an attack and a release, and and in theory, and this is how like Dolby noise reduction works, is in theory, this is what compansion is, and it's how all of our RF microphones work as well. You'd use what's called compansion, where you compress down the signal really, really heavily to try and get it over a radio wave, like with RF, and then you expand it out exactly the way it was compressed, to then get it back out to a usable audio signal. And that's
like DBX and stuff.
That's how noise reduction. Well, noise reduction is slightly different, but this same idea, right? So in theory, what I was trying to get to is you can compress if you know the exact way you compress something. In theory, you can uncompress it with the exact same settings with expansion, and it'll be exactly the same thing.
I just talked about that with Dave Durr on a previous interview.
Oh, amazing.
Well, I was talking about how excited I was to first discover the distressor.
Yeah.
And of course, I did what many people would do, which is just put it on whatever. I wanted to be more exciting, and I had it on a snare drum, but I over-compressed the snare in the recording stage. And then when we were mixing with Steve Albini, he said, I think I can expand this back out to bring back some of the dynamic and punch of the snare. And that was the first time I'd ever experienced that. But that's essentially what he was doing, I think, is he was trying to like reverse engineer the compression I'd done.
That's man, that's the guy to talk to about that stuff though. I've if you want to go way deep, that's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, it would have been. Well, so okay, cool. So expanding stuff to try and get a little bit more dynamic out of it. Yeah. And then bringing the level down. And now you can start. So why don't you describe to the rock stars some of the basics of like, what does it mean to cut a lacquer, and what is the Sillitoe lathe, and all that, because
well,
you have a bit of a robot going on over there.
I
too,
do.
right?
Well, and it's we're kind of in uncharted territory with the lathe community. So the lathe community, people who are cutting, are at this point, most of the people are cutting on machines that were made prior to 1982, and they were made absolutely beautifully, and they sound amazing. You know, you have the old Neumann machines of different iterations, VMS 80s, VMS 70s, and then some custom built stuff from older platforms. And then you have another company called Scully, which was the competitor company. And those are usually the two lathes. There's one other lathe, but you don't see very many of those out there. But these are the two that people are cutting on this day and age. But there's only like a handful of people in the world that can service these things, and it's really, really expensive to service them, and the parts are becoming few and far between. It's kind of like trying to restore a Model T, you know, like trying to find parts. At this point, a lot of people are just custom building new parts, and it's just becoming really, really cumbersome to really keep these older machines up and running. But that's not throwing any shade at them. They are wonderful machines, and they sound incredible. And trying to make a new machine to get back up to their standards is probably the most difficult thing, because they were so well engineered. The Neumanns have this computer system that allows to look ahead one revolution, and it adjusts pitch and depth of the groove so that you don't have grooves running into each other. And then also you can fit more time on a side, because you can collapse the grooves when you can bring the grooves really close together when you don't have a lot of certain information, so, and there's these analog computers on these machines that can do that calculation. It's all program. Like, so if there's not as much program, you can close things up. And when there's a lot of program in terms of loudness and bass, you have to open them up to make that space. We call it vertical and lateral. And you want to think of it as mono and antiphase. So everything that's, like just stereo information, if you don't have the mono information, it's the information that's exactly out of phase of itself. So like right is out of phase of left, right? Like, and all purposes from a schooling thought is, understand it by mid-side, but we don't really refer to it that way in the cutting world, because we have to be more technical about, this is my history nerd kicking in. Alan Blumlein invented this process in the 1930s, and we're still using that technology. But what's happening is the way to encode and decode the mono information and the out of the side information separately. And so like with the needle moving left and right, that's your mono information, and the needle moving up and down is your antiphase, your side information, is sort of in general. But getting something to move up and down and left and right is almost an impossible thing to do physically. So Alan Blumlein figured out a way to make them move at a 45-degree angle, like left and right and up and down. So it kind of moves, instead of moving up and down and left and right at the same time, we sort of have this 45-degree, this sort of 45-degree movement, which is why our groove, and I may get a bunch of cutting engineers that, rake me over the coal. I may get a bunch of cutting engineers or that like may rake me over the coals for describing it this way. So I'm doing my best. I apologize. But that's why our groove looks V-shaped. Like it's because it's moving 45 degrees both directions, up and down, left and right. So, and it was the way that they could get that encoded properly. The biggest thing that I want to say is like a vinyl record is literally a analog hard drive. It's just encoded information. Like the grooves are information that gets encoded in, and then you have to have a playback system to play that back out. So I call it the caveman hard drive. Like, and it, instead of spinning at, like like, what is it? 7,000 and 7,200, RPM, it spins at 33 and a third RPM, or 45 or whatever yeah. And if you just have a disc alone without the encode system and the playback system, they're useless. The information on it doesn't, like you have to have a way to encode it and decode it, just like we do with computers. It's the same idea, right? So on my machine, so I'm in new charter territory. I have a machine that called a Sillitoe cutting lathe. So after I shape up everything and get things mastered, I have actually another computer program called Space and Time Control, which is proprietary and connected to my lathe. It automates the lathe, and it also does all of the predictions. So instead of having a computer like on the old Neumann lathes that does those like pitch and depth predictions in real time, my program actually does. I drop the files from my mastering program into this program, and it does like a calculation of what, depending on what I have the parameters set at, like how loud it is versus like how much land I want, which is the space between the grooves, and what's my basic depth of those grooves. Yeah. Yes. Land is the dead space in between, they call it either dead wax, or they call it the dead space in between grooves, and how much we can control how much there is, so I load that into my computer, and then my software makes a prediction, and it actually gives me a readout. Like I get a visual disk of what my groove should look like based on what my files are. And then that information is then sent to the lathe while it's cutting as prediction. And then the lathe follows that prediction.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music, like the new iZotope Plasma plugin featuring flux saturation, which helps you sculpt the harmonics in your sound, enhancing the excitement and clarity of your tracks and mixes. And Ozone, with its built-in mastering assistant, helps you analyze your mix, suggesting all the settings you need for a professionally mastered result based on your chosen style of music and EQ curve, or reference a specific song if you want. Ozone features sophisticated yet simple modules like clarity and impact, low-end focus, stabilizer, imager, exciter, and spectral shaping, along with powerful dynamic EQ, compression, and limiting, allowing you to adjust the settings to your taste so it sounds incredible. And with the magic of master rebalance, you can even manipulate the vocal, bass, and drums separately at the mastering stage. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. Howdy, rock stars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. Joining you right here at Podzilla Studios at my place in East Nashville. My guest today is Duncan Ferguson. Duncan, are you ready to jam, dude?
Yes, jam's my favorite. So.
Awesome, man. Well, let's hear more about your studio too. So, the Voltage Exchange, beautiful place. Really has a gorgeous look to it. There's a video that I found online where you did an interview with Wilson Harwood.
Yeah.
The Soundproof, what is it? Soundproof Your Studio show, if I'm saying that correctly. I don't know. Did you work with Wilson to do that, or did he come over and sort of take a look at what you had done and you guys talked about it?
Because he's helping people soundproof their studio. Like that's what he did. He's
been a guest on the show too.
Oh yes, great. Yeah. It was fun. He just wanted to come over and take a look and be like, what have you done? And kind of show off, like this is what other people are doing and thinking about. And that was really fun. Yeah. He's a cool dude.
Well, so tell us a little bit about how you built and soundproof your studio. One of the things, the quotes you in there, you said, I started with an empty shell and I smarted the room.
Yeah.
So what is smarting a room?
It's smart as a program. It's made by a company called Rational Acoustics, and it's really, really popular use in the live sound world for tuning large line array PA systems. And you can get all sorts of data analysis from RTA microphones, or putting up omnidirectional microphones, and just analyzing noise in your space, and you can see all sorts of data. You can see if you can see early reflections, you can see phase information. That it's really easy if you want to get really deep into it. It's a really easy way to see if you have any drivers out of phase. It's a really expensive program, so it wouldn't be a great use of that, but for basics. But so I was able to, when I built my room, I put up an RTA mic. I put my speakers in place and just shot a bunch of weird noise, pink noise and tones and sweeps. And
so this is just an empty box of a space at this point, just echoey.
Yeah.
Nothing about it sounds good yet.
And sort of figured out exactly where my problem spots are going to be. And I had some pretty extreme restrictions with my room just based on its dimensions. And
how would you describe a problem spot when you're shooting that out? Let's say you've got this software and you see something, you're like, that's a problem.
Just modes and standing waves where things are collecting in areas in the room, and then where things are canceling.
And what does that mean when you look at a chart? Does that mean there's like a huge
so like
peak in one spot?
When things are summing together in one area of the room, they're summing together and you get like a big bump, in a certain frequency area. And then the direct opposite, usually with standing waves, it's like a really drastic like dip in one area. And you had Carl Tatz over, and he explained one big problem area for a lot of people is around the 120 hertz area. And it's kind of like has to do with like the architecture that we're just, like standard size rooms, speaker technology that just ends up being a huge problem spot.
Now, when you do this smarting the room test, you already have to have your speakers in position, right? Otherwise you don't know what you're testing.
And I can also I get them in a relative position. I know I'm going to do some fine adjustments based on some of what I'm seeing too. If you,
so if you have a big bass boost, you might move them away from the wall a little bit or something.
Yeah. Well, there's like quarter wavelength depending on, I have the big PMC IB1s, which are transmission line. So there's not a lot of bass coming off the back of those speakers, but still I made some soffits behind them to sort of absorb some of that as well. I could go really deep.
Yeah, that's cool.
You want to, and the angles of your speaker, there's the AES standard of having them at 30 degrees. I've found that the 30 degrees is sometimes too tight for near field monitors. So having them a bit wider actually really helps, not have too much buildup in the center of your image.
What is 30? When you say at 30 degrees, what does that mean?
It's the equilateral triangle of the listener at the point of the triangle, and then the speakers at the two other ends of the triangle.
Am I remembering this wrong? Isn't that 60, 60, and 60 makes an equilateral triangle?
Because that's the half. The 30 degrees is the half of the triangle.
I got it.
60,
okay.
60, yeah.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Sorry,
my
brain moves fast, and
that's good. That's my job.
You got to slow it down.
And break it down for us.
And because the other thing, I want to give a shout out to Ryan Smith and Joe over at Sterling. I was talking to Ryan this weekend, and we were talking about the things that I was talking about teaching and the things that I have to remind myself because we live in it every day. And then you get so used to it, you don't think about it anymore. That's something that I, like when you say, oh, isn't it 60 degrees? All of a sudden, oh yeah, 30, but it's only half of the triangle. And then like everybody who's listening to you is like, what are they talking about? Like you don't remember that. You're moving so fast because you live in it every day that you have to remind yourself some of the basics.
So an equilateral triangle, essentially to describe it for the podcast, picture a triangle with three equal sides, right?
Yeah.
And one side is the speakers in front of you from tweeter to tweeter, I guess. And then the other sides are the tweeter pointing to your head from the left side and from the right side, so that it creates a triangle, and your head sort of in the apex of that triangle, right?
Correct, yeah. And I've actually found that there's a famous studio designer in town named Steve Durr.
Yeah, Steve's great. He's been on the show too.
Oh, has he? Oh, awesome. He had said that they found that like stepping back from that triangle a little bit, you feel like it's more natural as well. So I feel like that equilateral triangle is sort of like a really good like center point for yourself, but you're going to then manipulate it a little bit to your liking to like make stuff feel like
if it feels too close together, you make them wider. If it feels too wide, you bring them closer.
I was just in a friend's room the other day and helping him get his speakers. Like he said he was sort of struggling to get his mixes.
You have friends?
Yeah, I have friends. No, I don't.
I thought we just lived in our studios by ourselves.
That was the joke this weekend of like, the only time I get out is the recording summit.
Right.
It's like, I just live in a cave all day with my studio assistant, Buster, my dog. And then it's like, it's our one time that we can nerd out, outside of the...
Well, in the spirit of Halloween, because I did the gig here and I got to sing the line, Buster makes me feel good.
There you go. Yeah, that's amazing. That's
all right. So
Yeah.
back to dead seriousness
Yeah.
here. So you've set up your equilateral triangle. You got your speaker set up. You shoot out your room with your smart, and then it starts to tell you that there's problems in certain modes. When you treat the room, there's what I remember learning is that there's frequency zones. There's everything below 300 hertz enters the zone of room modes and pile-ups of frequencies or cancellations of frequencies that we need to try and address. And then everything above 300 gets into sort of ray theory, which is like it sounds just bouncing around the walls into your ears. And so you're trying to address those things.
Yeah, it's all early reflections kind of in the 30 millisecond to 60 millisecond range is sort of like what we perceive as early reflections. So that's like what you were talking about, what the frequency range, like 500 hertz and up, or, sort of that. And it's sort of like you address those different things with different sort of like low end. A lot of times you're creating bass traps, in mostly all the time corners or like a solid wall of some kind usually it's a back wall. Or like you can have some soffits on your front wall is a typical design. And it's sort of subjective. There's no right way to do it. They just have all these little techniques of trying to like problem solve like a chess game.
Right. So it's like the reflection stuff is you think about sound going from the source of the speaker and trying to get to your ear, but then you think, okay, but it can also go from the speaker and bounce off the wall and then reach my ear. And so now you've got a slight delay on it and it's adding together.
Yeah.
And so in those cases, you can think about, well, I should put a treatment where it's going to bounce off the wall. And so it doesn't bounce off the wall, right? It's kind of like basic thinking like that. But then when you think about the lower frequency stuff and you think about those room modes and a bass trap, the sound moving about the room is not as relevant anymore, right?
Correct.
It's like it's more like there's low end in the room everywhere, even though that's not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
There's low end in the room, and so we're going to try and soak it up rather than thinking about it bouncing off something. But it really is bouncing off. It's like the low end accumulates on the wall surfaces and the floor and the ceiling, right?
Yeah, and it sums together in certain places and cancels in other places as it's, and
depending on the frequency.
Yeah,
right?
and this is where this gets mind-boggling. And this is what really helped me was like diving into the live sound world and tuning these giant line array PAs and understanding, like, we used to do subwoofer arrays where we would position subs, to then actually create a beam, or cancel beams, or like you could create a cardioid pattern with subs, and cancel out everything that's blowing back to the stage, so the musicians don't get hit with a ton of low end off the back of the subs. There's all sorts of things you can do to control that. And what really hit me hard when I was learning how to do all that was that no frequency is created equal. So like if you're trying to think about like, I would focus in on like, I got to think about 80 hertz. So if I do this one thing, I'll do that. But then 70 hertz is now doing a completely different thing. Like it's like a waterbed. You're trying to like, you're like, we think of things as singularity. I think when you start off as an audio student, or you think of things singular, like, I hear 3K, but what is 3.5K doing? Or what is
right.
2? Yeah. Like we can't encompass everything in our head, but what's happening in rooms is like, it's this gradient of all these things. So like if you have a problem in one area, you're going to have something else in another area, but you can't focus on one singular thing. You have to figure out this sort of overarching.
Right. So you don't see the problem right at one spike frequency and then say, okay, I'm only addressing that. You just think about it in a general.
Yeah.
It's like a wide band EQ is the way you treat things.
Yeah. Yeah. You sort of have to like we tend to start to think singularity, but in reality, there's just a whole lot of things happening, and they're all dominoes that are connected to each other.
Yeah.
And
well, it's interesting to think about studios and spaces as instruments too. It's like there's a resonance to it all. And that's
Yeah.
what makes it sound interesting. If you just move your speakers outside and put them on 2 stands and listen to them outside, you would have none of these problems.
Yeah.
But it might not sound interesting.
Well, they would sound, you'd measure them and it'd sound great. And then you'd listen to them and be like, this isn't interesting.
Right.
Like,
because we're used to hearing
it's a free field
spaces.
Yeah.
And that's fascinating too, because I wonder if it's just, so much of our experience is how we programmed our brain to understand things.
Yeah.
And I wonder if, if you just grew up to listening to music outside on speakers all the time,
yeah,
maybe we would have made different music and had a different understanding of what sounds good to us.
Yeah.
It's
totally
fascinating. All right. Well, so let's so now you figured out your studio and you figured out where the speakers were going to go and you did some treatments, but you also made it look really great. So talk a little bit about some of the aesthetic choices that you made that sort of make your space feel beautiful.
I had been in over the course of my career, I've been in some really wonderful spaces, and I noticed early on, and also the live sound company that I worked for, there was a business philosophy that if you present yourself in a cleanly, nice way, it really goes a long way. And while you may have
especially when you're doing a video podcast.
Yeah. We, we always were, I almost felt like when the live sound company I was looking for, we always had to like repaint our cases, as stuff on the road gets banged up a lot. And a lot of clients would come to that company because we were the clean looking company. We didn't look like a rock and roll tour that had just finished.
Right, there's not peeled console tape on every case.
And I kind of took all that, and then all of my favorite studio spaces that I'd been in, worked in prior to that, like with, I come from the classical world too, so it's, that just kind of goes a long way, aside from your own skill set, and people feel more comfortable in those spaces. And I just wanted to design a space that felt that way.
Well, I would say listening to your discography and Rockstars, we have a playlist of Duncan's work, which you can check out. It's going to be in the show notes. You can just click right through and go listen to some of his records. But they sound great, and there is a quality of attention to detail in them that I picked up on right away. There's a sonic consistency to low end and width and the EQ and all that's really nice. And then there's also just like they sound cleaned up. They don't sound like there's a mess in there. It's not a I don't know. Have you had a chance to do any punk rock kind of stuff too?
I just cut something for Piper that was like full on like punk rock, and that was really fun.
Yeah.
But I didn't master that. I just cut it. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
But it's fun to, I've worked on a lot of, it's fun to like I love that intersection of lo-fi meets hi-fi, sort of, I think the Black Keys Brothers album was an amazing example of that.
Yeah.
It was really, really fun, and it's really, really well presented, but then there are these lo-fi elements that so I work on a lot of things like that, sort of like from DIY artists,
Yeah.
So I lost the train. What was, remind me the exact
we were just talking about punk rock records. We're also talking about like, audio that sounds really cleaned up or whatever.
I think, some of my favorite records are like, you work really hard to make things dirty or like have an energy and vibe, and then as a mastering engineer I can take that and put it in a really nice palette, and you can digest it like in a way that that feels feels consumable. I don't know, that's sort of the way that I kind of look at that lo-fi and hi-fi energy. I come from the classical world, and I did a lot of jazz sessions as well in my undergraduate and graduate work. And so maybe that's just a voice that I'm just used to being, how we all can't help but put our, subconsciously, the reason why people hire you is for somewhat of a thing that you understand and can do to achieve a vision that they're thinking. Right.
Yeah.
So, I think, as much as I try as a mastering engineer, try to avoid having any sort of voice onto something, I work really hard not to. I think sometimes that sort of can seep out,
Well, and that's an interesting topic, because I've heard variations on mastering with that approach and that attitude. I've heard mastering and I've heard people describe mastering as a process that should have a transparency to it. Like the mix did what was supposed to be done, and it's a question of, bringing it over the finish line, but not changing the creative vision. But then I've also heard mastering. I mean, Richard Dodd once, I heard a master that he did for, I can't remember if it was one of the songs I mixed, but he threw a slapback onto it.
Oh, amazing!
And it sounded amazing.
That's awesome.
Sounded incredible.
It was the right thing for the right.
It was the right thing.
Moment. Yeah.
Yeah, and then recent stuff that we've been getting mastered with Chris Chamness. He's working with somebody new. I'll have to come back with the name, but there's a quality to it that sounds bold and like willing to, expand the vision of it. And I love that stuff too in the right setting.
I think there's like not one size fits all. And I kind of choose depending on what the project needs. And actually, cutting lacquers for other mastering engineers has been a real sort of revealing of that a bit. So like when a project comes in, I'll evaluate like, okay, do I need to be hands off with this and like just transfer the mixes and, do like Ian Shepherd says, do little harm, do no harm.
Right.
Or there are other projects where I said, like the mix can really use X, Y, or Z. And I think this is actually their intention. So I can take it a bit further with enhancement sometimes in the right, and then reading those sort of street smart cues of like, I think they were going this direction. So I can help them get there.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that was the Richard Dodge, so there was a feeling in that,
Yeah, I think he definitely just was following whatever his instinct was and just going for it.
And so, but with lacquer cutting, like, especially with the high caliber of like some of the mastering engineers who I'm working with for trying to, trying to preserve what they did on the lacquer as much as possible. Like that's a complete hands off, and then getting the lacquer to translate to the digital, so.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring the new Contact 8. This comprehensive collection includes a fantastic range of versatile synths, sampled instruments, and innovative studio effects, giving you everything you need to bring your music to life. Whether you're composing emotional scores, deep dance floor grooves, or experimenting with sound design, Complete 15 has you covered. Discover powerful plugins and instruments that guide you from the initial idea all the way through to the final mix. The included Contact 8 introduces exciting new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a cutting-edge hybrid instrument that merges organic and synth sounds in real time. Plus, enjoy revamped versions of Massive X and Guitar Rig 7 Pro to take your sound to the next level. Then polish your mixes off with the AI-enhanced iZotope Ozone 11 included in Complete 15 bundle. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Well, so let's talk about the tools, some of the tools that help sort of clean up a recording too for mastering.
Yeah.
Is iZotope and RX one of the things that would be a typical part of the process?
I use it every day. And it's amazing how powerful those tools have gotten. Like I go in and if there's certain, even on the mastering stage, and I am open and transparent about all this, but like, even if there's even some mouth ticks or pops that I feel on the mastering side, like get brought out, like as you start cleaning things up, just, I go in and take those out with iZotope. I do make sure that to tell the artist, hey, I'm doing this, like if you wanted that in there as for like authenticity, I'll leave it, but this feels distracting, like sometimes even like, like there's high frequency things that sound like edits, but they're actually like mouth.
Just mouth.
Yeah.
Because, the reason is because the mouth gets so amplified through the mix process.
Yeah.
That just the little bit of spit and, moving your tongue around or whatever.
And a lot of times I'm catching edit, like some edit stuff, like, when a tracking engineer or mix engineer listens to things over and over and over, your brain glosses over some of that stuff too, which is not they're focused on other things too. They're focused on getting it to like have this sort of thing. And so it's sort of like it's like a mini proofread of like, oh, like we spelled that one little word, we missed a letter in that word, or that whole thing. So I'm a lot of times I don't even send the mix back. I can clean the edit up with spectral editing, between WaveLab and RX,
Yeah. Let me see if I can see if there's anything fun to look at RX wise. My internet's not really working, so might have to blow that idea off. Well, so when you use RX in a mastering process, is it like the first move?
Yeah.
Or is it like later on after you've amplified things?
I do it with my first listen simultaneously, trying to be efficient as I load it into the standalone RX first. And this is just my, I load it into RX first, and then I do an analysis. I sort of listen to it, make some notes, and then try to catch that stuff before I load it into WaveLab, which is my mastering program.
So first you do an audit of the music and just sort of listen carefully, which is a big part of what you describe on your website too, the critical listening. But in other words, you don't just automatically do stuff, you listen to see where it needs to go. Yes. Yeah.
And I actually, with my handy dandy notepad, I just make some notes, and that first listen is so critical. Like my first impression basically takes care of 80% of what I'm going to, if I don't get that first listen and be completely objective to it, then I feel like I'm not as efficient as a mastering engineer to really evaluate what it needs.
Yeah.
From like my background or
it's true. It's true for me in mixing too, and other things where it's easy to keep getting. It's like we're so good at hearing things that we could do.
Yes.
That as soon as we come up with an idea and it's presented to us, we just follow that path. It feels like, the equivalent would be like doom scrolling social media on your phone or something. You're like, oh, that's interesting. Oh, I'll click on that,
Sure.
And we fall into that trap in making music, whether we're recording or overdubbing or mixing or, sound checking a kick drum, even, at the early stages, or mastering at the last stage. So that process of just saying, I'm just going to sit down and passively listen and then make a note when I hear something that needs to be addressed. It gives us a little roadmap to then go in and just go do those things first. And I find that can be very powerful because, especially as you say, if we have the strength of a first impression in that moment, and we've taken notes, then we can just go address those things that we thought we needed. Sometimes the things that we address, I go address them and I come back and I'm like, well, that's not better. I still don't like it or something. But a lot of times it really can do a cool thing.
Yeah.
And it really does help us cross the finish line too efficiently. Otherwise we just get pulled endlessly towards new things.
Yes. Yeah. It's actually kind of like the note taking that I was talking about earlier, where like I'm laying out my day. I'm doing that with a song or a recording, It's just laying out exactly what I think needs to be addressed. The biggest thing is to the biggest things that we can do is what we don't do, right? Like it's like in the music, like when somebody's writing a song or making a recording, it's like sometimes the best, it's almost like what's in between the notes as opposed to the notes themselves. So like in mastering, I found that actually reigns true. Like some of the biggest things that I can do is not do certain things at all, and it kind of lets the mix breathe through. And then if I I think it's all about making the exact right decisions that it needs. And that can get really, really complicated. Like how do I do as little as possible, but do what it needs? And that's like the $1 million question.
Yeah, really. Do you find, so when you're mixing, making a change to one thing that you think you're getting right can actually affect something else and cause the other thing to start to feel wrong. Is that similar in the mastering process?
It's even more similar. Like It's even more deeper. Cause like if I feel like something has an issue, and I say, oh, I'm going to correct for this, the snare drum is just poking through too much and sort of hitting me in the wrong way, but the snare drum's in the center and the vocal's in the center. If I change the frequency in the snare drum, there is a huge likely chance that frequency is going to overlap in the vocal, so like if I pull that down, then I'm changing something in the vocal. So I think it's even more, like 100 times more in mastering, because we're just dealing with a 2-track, right? Or the sum down mix, and we're changing things within that.
I remember my first, one of my first cars, when I would install my own stereo systems, I had a graphic equalizer that I got at one point, and I put that in there. And it was a lot of fun actually to go down and like tweak it from song to song. And I felt like it was one of the first learning moves for mixing, is like adjusting the EQ settings in the car. Have you ever found that, and I know we have digital ones, my Tesla has a little graphic EQ. I could mess with it. I usually just leave it flat, but, do you think that's a kind of a fun way for people to begin to explore what does mastering mean? Is like start taking a finished thing and just EQing it and seeing what happens?
I think that's great because it can reveal a lot of things, especially actually that's a great way to help understand low end and how low end affects you, and how it moves around in different spaces, especially like when you're dealing with like bass notes. Like the biggest thing that a lot of times what I deal with with mastering is uneven bass notes that pop, or uneven, not bass notes from the bass guitar, but like when the mix gets summed together and the mix engineer may not be in an environment where they can hear that very well. We get a lot of like inconsistent motion in the bass of like different things that are summing together. And so like I can go through and like keep the mix relatively solid as they intended, and then just kind of like get that to feel more consistent and have it, and it makes the mix more enveloping, in my opinion.
So sometimes there are, with bass instruments and bass guitars and things like that, there are certain chords and notes sound huge in the low end, and other ones seem to like the low end can seem to go away and stuff like that. How would you talk about that, and how would you possibly address some of those things at a mastering stage to figure it out? Or how do you even advise the mixer to go back and address it?
I try to not send stuff. I'm going to answer that with almost a different topic. Developing trust, like I have a lot of return mix engineers who enjoy what I do, and it really becomes a symbiotic relationship where you build that trust between each other, and then you kind of like that safe space that you open up. You can really talk about, hey, when I do this, how do you feel about that? And then the mix engineer will be like, when I do this, how does this translate? And then you kind of go back and forth.
And that's having a client in the room with you?
Or a mix engineer who we can communicate over email or phone, like who send me stuff a lot. Like I get like something from them once a month, or, or just a few albums over the year. Like you can really develop a relationship where it's not so much like the ideas that I have. It's like, oh, I'm hearing this. And then the mix engineer's like, well, I did this. And then I said, well, if I do this, does that help this? You're sort of working as a team back and forth, and you're doing that for the artist. And I think that's why the artist picks that, like in a weird way, it's like sort of the artist picks the team, and then you guys got to like, actually, I think what a lot of things get missed in the music industry with production teams is they don't work together. Yeah. And it's like, I've really worked really hard to say, hey, this isn't my record. Like I'm a service and I'm your team member, and we all got to like have some sort of connection to get this, like all my favorite records are these giant teams, Yeah. Like, so I didn't mean to steer us off topic there.
I didn't know we were off topic.
Okay.
It felt pretty on topic to me.
Okay.
But when I think about the team thing too, I think about what it's like to be somebody turning over music for somebody to mix, or turning it over for somebody to master.
Sure.
Probably the same feeling for somebody who just comes in and sings, and they're turning over their voice to the recording engineer and the producer in the studio, or somebody overdubbing a guitar part and then saying, and then they hear it back through the speakers, or like the drummer comes in and plays a drum part and then here's how do the drums play back. There's a level of trust and letting go that is part of the whole process.
Right. Yeah.
And with that is often, it's very easy to just have an accompanying sense of self-doubt, So like you turn over a finished mix to a mastering engineer, and then it comes back, and you might hear things that don't hit you right or do or don't or whatever. And then you're
Second
like,
guess. Yeah.
and then you're like in this state of like, oh gosh, I don't even say gosh. Oh God, did I screw it up?
Yeah.
You know? Okay. Sometimes I say gosh, but you know, you're wondering like, did I screw it up or is this the mastering thing that's doing it? And you're immediately in a sense of potential self-doubt. And so that's where like that ability to communicate and that ability to feel like you're on the same wavelength is so helpful.
I've been in that situation in both directions. And that's why I've created just this open, safe environment to like, I don't want the mix engineer to feel that way. Also, I want the mix engineer to be really excited about what they've done. And when I give it back to them and be like, wow, my mix feels like it's my mix, but man, we got this to a place that it needed to get to.
Yeah.
You know?
And I mean, granted, we're not all the same. We're all like artists with different styles. So
sure.
like, I don't think that we have to assume that whatever system we create is going to automatically be perfect for everybody. We have to also be ready for the fact that like, you know, I'll just use the example of like bringing in a singer to sing on a track. I mean, the voice is so personal. It's like you're going to bring in one singer and you might have the greatest communication in the world and they might do a fantastic job. But in the end, you're like, that's just not the voice we're looking for, you know?
Yeah, it doesn't fit the situation or your feeling, I guess, right?
Yeah, or an artist working with a producer or something. You might be like, you know what, I'm looking for a different kind of style. Same thing with a mixing engineer or a mastering engineer.
Correct, yeah.
But through that process, it's like, assume for a minute that there's a good chance this could be the right fit. It's that need for there to be a great process of feeling like we're on the same page. It's a great team. When we talk to each other, I feel like you understand me kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that you can get to that point of making the best version of the record that you're trying to make.
Yeah. I couldn't agree with that 100%. I've tried to foster that environment.
Wait, you couldn't agree with that 100%?
I
just messing with
the
you.
English language is just so confusing.
I know, that's why
right?
we listen, right? That's why we listen to speakers all day.
It's like, oh man, it's like there are phrases that I say when I'm like, why do I like? Where did that come from? Or it's right, like yeah.
Oh, I was looking on Google. I'm like, what's the derivation of like some expression? You know,
it's like yeah. We use words that don't logically work in the situation, but it's the whole culture has moved it that direction. You know?
Yeah.
So,
speaking of having to get up and use words a lot, one of the things you do is you also teach at SAE, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. What's SAE? What do you do over there?
So I have a master's degree, which allows me to teach at the bachelor's courses at the level, which is part of their accreditation. And it's I teach I teach a few different classes, but the main thing that I was brought in to work on was the mastering class at SAE. So and SAE is they're a school here in Nashville that
was a School of Audio Engineering.
They have multiple campuses around the U.S. And they're owned by a large parent company in Australia called Navitas. That's an educational company. But it serves a demographic of students who maybe wouldn't have the opportunity to go to like a major university. I teach night classes, and I feel like it's a really great way that I can give back to the community. And I was looking for something where I could do that. And their philosophy is they don't want academics who are tenured working. They want like actual people who are working in the field that can give students, they can give students the real time on the ground, like what's happening. And that feels really authentic. And I'm able to just say, hey, this is what I do every day. And these are the things to think about. And if you sort of in classes, So,
I like SAE. It's a cool spot.
Yeah.
I think that it does have a feel of like, it's like a working class. Shout out to Matt Boudreau and working class audio, but SAE feels like a working class audio education program.
Even down to the thing of like, I went to them and say, hey, do we have an avenue for publishing like something, like, cause I know in major universities, like if you're tenured, you're required to publish, things. And the the person who's running it, who's one of my supervisors, said, "Oh no, that we don't want you. We don't have avenues for that because we want you to just give what you like. We hired you because you're working in mastering every day.
Yeah.
Like don't worry about publishing. Just give them what you're doing every day. And what you're working on, what you've all that sort of thing. So
you're teaching
kind of like counterintuitive because they come from the academic world where that's like
So you guys are teaching in classroom settings over there, but also sort of internet settings as well. And
so I do half of my classes in person and half of my classes online, and I do it from my mastering studio.
So that nobody gets a full class, you just do a half a class. Just kidding.
Our classes, we have 4 hours. You also the cool thing about SAE is you can do a bachelor's degree in about half the time because they run their semesters all year round, and the semesters are like condensed into 7 weeks. And you are immersed in like only 2 classes per semester. So so
you really focus.
It's like an accelerated program.
Yeah. That's good. That tends to be good for me. I do well when I can just focus on one thing at a time. But I also have learned that so often we only get to focus on one thing at a time for a little bit, and then you got to put it down and go focus on something else. And so for me, a big challenge has always been like, okay, how do you learn the shit out of something up to this point and then put it away and know that you don't even get to come back and relearn it again for 6 months.
Yes.
And then how do you pick up where you left off?
Yeah. I struggled with that. Like, cause I just always wanted to like, if I'm not in it all the time, like it's like a language, you use it or lose it. Right.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't know.
I do things like stuff like this, like figuring out how to do a video podcast. I'll deep dive, learn something for a while. And then I try and at the point at which I got it figured out and I have to put it away and go focus on something else, I'll just do like a video walkthrough note to myself. I'll just take my phone and just like walk around, point at everything, explain it all to myself. Like I was saying, like, here's how you do this.
Yeah.
And here's why that, works or doesn't. And that kind of helps. But then the problem for me is then I'm like, where'd I put that video?
Yes. Yeah.
6 months later.
Yeah. No, it's digital organization. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Like that's a whole nother topic.
Well, we did hit a little bit of that already, so that's good. But when you're teaching the mastering class at SAE, what do you find are some of the common questions that the students have about it? And, I think, and you find you're always having to answer over and over.
I've developed from what I've learned through teaching that class is like the biggest thing is not so much like the nitty-gritty technical detail. It's teaching people how to like develop their own critical listening. And that's why I put critical listening in sort of like my bio is what I got from my master's degree and studying with some of the people who I studied with is how to truly critical listen and then what critical listening actually is. And then how do you translate that over to like subjectively the subjective art? How do I stay a mastering engineer and work on things technically, but then understand what's happening artistically?
Yeah.
And I feel like students come in and they're like, how do I do this? And then they say like, well, I could do how do I do all these technical things? And you look at what they're really asking. It's like, how do I actually listen?
Right.
And so I kind of have taken, I have a system in these classes that I've developed myself that I sort of stole from my McGill background at McGill University, and then taken from some AES white papers of how to evaluation, how to evaluate recordings, and kind of sum that all together. Oh, and there's also another textbook from a guy named Jason Corey who runs the University of Michigan program, and he wrote a book on critical listening as well, a really awesome textbook. I ask everybody should check that out. And he's another McGill alumni. I think he got his PhD from McGill. So.
McGill's up in Canada.
Yeah, McGill, Quebec. Yeah. In Montreal.
Were you studying under George Massenburg?
Yes, George Massenburg, Richard King, Martha D. Francisco, and Wisław Wojciech. It's hard to say. It's Polish, so it's trying to pronounce his last name and spell it is. Those are the 4 people that were there. George has since retired from teaching, and he's back in Nashville now as well. So,
right.
And I know you've had him on the podcast before. Yeah.
He was on the podcast. Yeah.
So,
he joined us remotely at the time. And then of course I've been in his room at Blackbird.
Yes. The diffusion,
which is an incredible
diffusion room.
Yes. The diffusion room. Yeah.
We discussed that a lot in class. So that was fun.
That's a cool thing.
Yeah.
Do you feel like the time that you've spent watching YouTube videos, trying out mix tricks, and tweaking version after version of your mixes has gotten you nowhere? Have you been looking for more of a simple and straightforward step-by-step process for creating a pro mix that won't take years to learn? What if you could have a Grammy-winning mix engineer who understood all of your struggles and could coach you through them? If you struggle with any of these questions, then the Ultimate Mixing Masterclass is just for you. Now you can discover the proven step-by-step mixing system from Grammy-winning mix engineer Craig Alvin for consistently creating a pro-quality mix in your home studio that will sound great everywhere. Listen to this quote from one of our students, David. That was absolutely the most helpful and informative block of information and mentoring on the mixing process that I have ever been a part of. That was like sitting behind a mix engineer for years, watching and picking up pro tips along the way, condensed into a 6 to 7 hour session. Look, I'm so confident that this will help you take your mixes to the next level, that if you can't get a killer mix in 30 days, I'll give you a refund, no questions asked. So if you're ready to take your mixes to Grammy-winning quality, then go to ultimatemixingmasterclass.com and start now by checking out the free preview of the ultimate snare mixing trick. And hopefully I'll see you in the front row of the Grammys. Yeah, the ability to listen. So one of the things that I think of when I imagine learning critical listening is like, you're learning to listen for things that you didn't know what they were before. And some of that comes just with experience and time. I mean, like I hear things in a recording, in music, in production that I'm sure I couldn't have heard initially, but I hear them immediately. And there's stuff that that is a level of technical stuff where you could probably put a name to it and explain it. And then there's also stuff where you have like this internal gut meter that you know it's not right, you know, and that's probably the balance of like the tech side versus the personal creative side as well. But I imagine there's also, you know, do you find that there's a universal language that is useful in terms of critical listening and being able to describe what something needs? And then there's also like the importance of having a personal language for describing it.
This is the topic where the students. This has like been my deepest topic of like being a mastering engineer. Sorry, it's really. I've developed a system of like, okay, we have our own way of like internalizing things and hearing things, and a lot of times people can't put that into words, right? How do we take that and then internalize it and communicate it to the artists and the mix engineers or the production team of that we're working with? So, like, how many times have you heard like somebody say like, "Oh, that was warm,"
right?
Well, like my warm and your warm are probably vastly different, you know. Or like I had this revelation.
I mean, I take ice baths for fun, so probably yeah.
When I had this situation in my master's degree, a buddy of mine and I were going back and forth, and we were discussing like, "Oh, that sounds really bright," and I'm like thinking like, "That doesn't sound bright." And then I opened up the conversation and be like, "Okay, what is your bright and what is my bright?" You know, he's like, "Oh yeah, my bright's like 4K." You know, like I'm like, "Oh shoot, my bright is like 12K." You know, everybody has this, you know, and those are vastly different textures. You know, in a recording, vastly different. You know,
and so we can refer to actual frequencies. Although I sort of find that helpful and useful in the studios, and other times I'm like, it doesn't mean anything to me.
I've come up with what I'm teaching my students is at the beginning of every mastering class, around teaching, we go into like technical stuff, and I have technical things of like how to make a DDP, and you know, like how to do actual technical mastering things. But at the beginning of every class, the first hour of every class, we sit down and we listen to something and we evaluate it on a set of criteria that I've taken from Jason Corey's book. I've taken from George when I was in class with him. I've taken Vyacheslav, and then there's an AES white paper, and they all kind of have these 6 pieces of. Well, I've added they all have these 6 pieces of criteria that kind of accumulate a way that you can kind of house everything under some categories and be able to listen consistently, especially in a professional setting, like if you're having to work for somebody else, and then communicate that out to somebody. And the categories are first category is spectral content. Like, how do I translate what I'm hearing into frequency analysis? The second category is dynamics. And under that category, and Bob Katz puts it perfectly in his book, like microdynamics versus macrodynamics, and I have subcategories under all these of like things you got to think about. The third category is spatial impression, which is how wide am I hearing things versus how deep. Like mixes have a front and back to them. Some people say they actually have some height too, but I think that's really dependent on the system and then the next category is what we call transparency.
And we should clarify, we're probably talking about listening on stereo speakers at this point.
Yeah. But you can translate that. You can translate all this to immersive really easily.
Well, in immersive, you clearly have height because there's speakers above your head too.
Yeah. Actually, yes, that very much so. Yeah, that I was speaking specifically with the height on stereo, but in immersive now we have real height, right?
Yeah.
Which is incredible.
It is pretty cool. Have you dabbled in immersive yourself yet?
Yes, I have just dabbled. And I'm looking for, me personally, I'm looking for a practical application where the second that I haven't gotten projects yet to justify the expense. And the second that happens, I personally will be really excited when I can truly dive really deep into it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Back to I was on spatial impression, which was once we talk about spatial impression, I dive into what's called transparency. When we're listening, do we hear a lot of processing on the recording that we're listening to, or does it feel really raw?
Yeah.
And there's kind of a transparency meter.
Yeah.
Like how transparent does it feel versus how processed it feels?
And how transparent do we want it? Sometimes we want it transparent. Sometimes we want it processed.
Yeah. Well, and then it kind of can, the whole thing, the list of things that I'm giving you right here is a way to reverse engineer a recording from like the way that I've found a way to, like, when I'm working on something and I get a mix that I feel is not transparent, and there's a lot of processing on it, I'm probably going to choose a route or some processing on it, or where I'm not going to be doing very much to it because I don't want to bog it down with other processing on top of processing. Seems to be, you know what I mean? Whereas like if something's really raw and transparent, it may need a little more, everything's situational. Like I may be able to get away with more processing because it doesn't have as much on it, sort of. I'm thinking of it that way in a mastering mind, but when you're working in any stage, this is really good things to take notes on. Like if you're working on an individual sound versus a whole mix, or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And then the next category is noise and distortion, and now that falls into, there can be an artistic noise and distortion, or there can be like technical problems, and being able to listen for technical problems and decide whether a technical problem, whether something is artistically done in a way that, or it's an actual technical problem that you need to change,
Right. Sometimes you just can't. Sometimes you hear problems and there's just nothing you can do about it.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating because you're just like.
And then the last thing, the gut thing that you're talking about that we can't describe, I stole this from the AES white paper, but I kind of like changed it a little bit, is like, what's your gut feeling? Like all those things, that list of things combined, what are you getting? Like, what is emotionally, what are all those things triggering in you emotionally? And I think that's really, really important at the end of like, what does it all boil down to?
Right, because that's the only experience anybody's actually going to have.
Correct.
When it's done.
Yeah, but those categories are a way that we can, like, as a industry professional, I can turn around to an artist and say, hey, I'm feeling this, and this is a way that I can technically describe it to you without telling you that some vague terminology that's like, this is warm, or this is bright, or this is like, and it, or where I can talk to another mix engineer and say, hey, like in this category, I'm dealing it with this way, and so I'm sort of trying to impart on the students that, like, having a consistent way to critically listen and evaluate a recording in a way that you can translate that out universally. Yeah.
I find that's useful too in the production process in the studio, where I'm like working with an artist and I hear something, I hear the tag's too long, or I hear that the bass, something doesn't go away and come back in, it doesn't leave a space, or, the bass is playing up high on the neck instead of low in the neck, all kinds of things like that. Or vocals, there's a harmony or there's a double or there isn't in a moment. And I'll think about, since I've done this for a while, I might immediately have an instinct that says, well, don't do that. You need to do this.
Yeah.
But when I communicate to the artist, I've learned that it's helpful to start breaking down, like, well, why is that the right choice to make or suggest? And so I'll try and present it that way. Now I'll say well, if you do it like this, and then, you go up high on the neck on the bass, then the fundamental on the low end sort of disappears from the mix for a second.
Yeah.
And if you decide to play a low note right there, you may discover that there's more impact. It feels bigger in that moment. And so then, like, if you'd like the song to feel big in that moment, that might be the right choice. If you'd like the song to not feel so big in that moment or suspended, you might like the high note there. Explaining it, breaking it down for like what is the experience when you make that particular choice.
I love that, because you're still giving the artist a chance to like create. You're just giving them the tools to choose and create what they want, their experience.
Yeah, and then hopefully I'm not too long-winded where they're like, all right, let's just record.
Yeah, it's like, I'm just going to play it.
I'm just going to play it.
I'm just...
but I do love that too. I love when I'll make suggestions to an artist sometimes about a lyric or something.
Yeah.
And then they just come back and they just like one better. They're just like, I just like that one. I'm like, great. I gotta remember to take that.
I was in a session with a close friend of mine recording a vocal, and she was like, oh, I'm really struggling with this. And I just changed one word for her, and she's like, oh my gosh, that like opened everything. Like it kind of broke the roadblock.
Yeah.
And she's like, I'm giving you a point or a credit. And I'm like, I don't give me a point or a credit for one word. This is...
I don't even know what that stuff means.
It's
hardly
like,
anymore,
it's like,
anyway.
she's like, you get publishing on that. I was like, no. I'm here to it's like, please don't go that deep, It's,
right.
Yeah.
I've probably co-written a lot of songs in the studio that I never got any writing credit for. Yeah. And I don't know whether those songs went off to make much money that it would have mattered anyway, but maybe they did.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, I mentioned low end and bass. Low end does seem to be an important part of making records, because it's sort of where the body of the sound is, a lot of times it's where the weight and impact of what we're doing can be. So let's see. So one of the questions I wanted to ask you was just like, should low end seem big in a mastering playback system? I always wonder, like, does the playback in your mastering studio feel this similar or different to what it might feel in a mixing environment or in a studio environment when you're creating, or even in a consumer environment when you go back and listen in the car and you're like, yeah, this feels great?
I think my mastering environment, and this is just me personally, needs to reflect the bell curve of all those situations. So like, I need to be able to make decisions and translate those decisions out to every playback system. So I need to have a system that kind of falls, for me personally, I need to have a system that kind of falls in the middle of all that. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So like, cars tend to have a ton of low end because you're just stuck in a box and it builds up. Right. Like you're forcing low end into a space it can't fit, So like, cars are going to have more low end, whereas, like our clock radios or our little earbuds or stuff are not going to have any low end. They're below a certain point. Although the Apple Pods are getting better every.
That's true. They are getting better and better.
So I need to have like a system that fits in the middle of all of that, and then be able to judge, calibrate one direction or another and understand what's happening in all those spaces. Yeah. That's my personal opinion. But at some point, everything is relative. Like, you get to know your system so well that you then learn how it translates other ways. But
I mean, I find the car has always been a super, super important part of the equation for me.
Yeah.
But of course, I've been making records since before headphones were worth listening to.
And it's like our media, like everybody used to just listen to music in the car, right? Like on road trips or driving to work, or, like that was like a huge, so like, of course we're going to sort of lean that direction. Right.
And we also had a weird mix of like, our reference was radio.
Yes.
which was like not even apples to apples.
Correct.
Like,
Because of all the stuff.
we're listening to radio, and that's what it sounds like. And then we're making something, printing it to a cassette or a CD, and then playing that back in the car.
Yeah.
And radio, totally different.
Radio had all this crazy compression that
Yeah.
it had to, you had to, it's just, so that's why that car listen became so popular, right? And now we're shifting, right? Like we're shifting, like while people are listening in their cars, they're like, this is what's controlling, what's on, like we're shifting all of our playback to that.
I love it. I love that
this
all
area
of my references now are coming from my phone to my car.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that in this particular car, the audio quality when you stream from the phone to the car seems to be totally high res to me. I don't know if it 100%, is, or if there's some limitation, but it sounds freaking great.
It's probably not, but the gap of, like medium doing digitally is we're shrinking the codecs, like if you're for the streaming codecs are just every progression, they're just getting better and better. We're able to get more information into those codecs.
Now, one of the challenges can be that the streaming services now finally, well, not even finally, it's been this way for a while, but the normalization of song levels from track to track. So we used to have the loudness wars. One thing was louder, so you try and make your stuff louder to compete with that. Now the streaming services balance out those levels so that everything stays in a consistent zone, although there's still a loudness within that.
Yes.
But then when you bring your mix on the phone out to the car and press play, there's new challenges where your mix actually might sound louder than what's playing back because
if you have normalization,
it doesn't have the normalization coming back off of your phone. So maybe talk a little bit about that if you want. And then do you, I guess this could be the other part of the question. You use some of the tools like maybe FilePass or Samply to deliver masters to people and get feedback and comments. And then along with that, do you have any file naming stuff that you want to throw into that mix about keeping that organized so you know what everybody's talking about?
The file naming is a big piece of what I took away from George and the archiving stuff. So I don't know it's
all one and the same. You basically think about it like this. You've handed over something. It's on their phone. They're playing it off their phone into their car, trying to decide how it sounds.
Yeah.
What are they faced with? And then they want to give you feedback and the file naming is part of that, making sure they know what what you're both talking about the same thing.
So I deliver on I use FilePass. And so the note keeping on FilePass is pretty, I like FilePass more so than I like, because of the delivery is really easy. It's very generic. It doesn't look like anything. I just have my little logo in the corner and I feel like it's a blank slate. So the artist isn't seeing like colors and, you don't want
to influence people's perception of it.
And then my invoicing is all connected into that. So it's all it's like a one-stop place. I haven't found anything that works better for exactly what I do.
Right. And in mastering, delivery is often a single file.
Yeah.
And so the invoicing means you can upload a file, people can hear it, they can approve it, and then they hit the buy now button to download.
Correct. Yeah. And it really makes the handoff, the cash, like the handoff of like, hey, I've done this work and, like I need to be compensated for my time. It kind of makes that handshake really, really, really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know I have some friends who just require payment up front. And I feel, like I have a free revision policy for everything I do. And if we get too in the weeds, we have conversations,
Right.
But I want you to like walk away from what I work on with feeling proud of it. And if I can't achieve that, then maybe we aren't a great fit. So I also work with I don't want to like cause pain to somebody who doesn't like my product and it's not even a product. It's like I'm helping them achieve what they want, So I feel like the handshake right where FilePass puts it is like really, really respectful to both sides.
Yeah.
Like,
well, one of the cool things about the delivery of music through the buy now to download button is it also removes the need to send a client an invoice and then send them a reminder about it and then send them
I don't have to remind. Yeah, I don't have to send out it. Yeah, it kills like it's a time saver, and then it also doesn't have, you don't have to have those awkward conversations of like, hey, you haven't paid yet. Like I just wanted to check, follow up.
Fun.
Yeah.
They're not fun conversations.
And also like that, I feel like that sort of sometimes can damper some of the excitement of like a great project, right? Subconsciously, but at the same time, it's like we're all professionals. We need to be, we need to be paid for our time, and like we're adding something to a value to the project.
For 15 years, I had a famous MCI console at my studio that originally came from Criteria Studio C in Miami, where it made some of the most iconic Grammy-winning records of the 1970s. And it sounded incredible. When I was ready to upgrade my studio to a full digital mixing setup, I teamed up with Rick Carson at Make Believe Studio, Metric Halo, and Golden Ear producer Bill Simzik to recreate the legendary MCI console as the new MBSI plugin. The MBSI captures the same iconic sound used on multi-million selling records like Hotel California for the Eagles, Saturday Night Fever and Staying Alive for the Bee Gees, I Shot the Sheriff for Eric Clapton, We're an American Band for Grand Funk Railroad, and the soundtrack to Grease, the movie, all for legendary producers like Tom Dowd, Todd Rundgren, and Bill Simzik. The MBSI plugin not only delivers the authentic sound of the original MCI console faithfully, but it also adds new features like a top-notch compressor, overdrive, and a dual EQ filter switch, adding tools that Bill Simzik said he would have loved to have in the original console. Now you too can get that Grammy-winning MCI sound in your home studio. Whether you're recording or mixing, you can experience the sound of Miami 1976 with the MBSI plugin and soak up a little sunshine in your sound at makebelievestudio.com/MBSI. So talk a little bit about the naming of files so that everybody knows which version we're talking about and then how to discuss it.
Yes. So this is a really
and
big...
how did they give you comments?
This is feedback? A big thing that I have really dove really deep into in terms of how do I organize my hard drives? How do I mastering? We deal with so many files and we have to keep track of everything, and we have to be able to pull up. In my opinion, I keep every, like if you're an artist who works with me, I have every session I've ever worked on backed up in numerous places, and I can pull that at a moment's notice. If they need somebody, if I worked on something in 2016, somebody can call me in 2024 and say, hey, can I get file? Oh, perfect case in point. I have an artist who's doing re-release, and I worked on 2 albums for this artist, and he was like, he's an older gentleman, and he's used to sort of life before digital. And he said, what is it going to take to pull up my albums? And I need to re-release. I'm finding a new distributor. And can I get the masters for this, this, and this? And then I'm thinking about Atmos, all these sort of things. And I said, it's only going to take me like 4 mouse clicks. And he's like, what? So it's not going to take you like a week to gather all that stuff? I was like, no, I have the stuff, like everything's in final folders. It's labeled. I can just go into a drive and just pull it, Yeah. And he's just like, oh. And I said, I can have it for you in 2 hours. When he called, it was convenient.
Right.
It was like that moment of like, oh, I'm transitioning to working. I could just grab that right now for you. It's like, and I put it up on FilePass, and that was, So having a naming scheme that allows you to do that and be able to find things really quickly and have it all archived nicely, it's really, really important. So like it's really, really detailed, but typically when I send something to an artist, it's artist name, album name. Like if I'm sending you an individual file, like, and it's on it's artist name. The nomenclature is artist name, album name, song sequence, and then a descriptor of production master,
What does song sequence mean?
Song sequence is the track order that it is on the record. So
I
the
see.
number,
Okay.
so that it's always like if you throw it into a computer, the album will always stay in its own order.
Right.
It's not like song number one, because song number one has a different alphabetical. It's like your computer, jumbles them, right?
Yeah.
And then song title, and then there's a descriptor on it that I put in parentheses. Like if I'm just doing a test master for somebody, I'll put a description that says this is a test. It says test master or it says production master. And the words production master means that if this is approved by the artist, it can go into production.
Mm-hmm.
Like meaning that this can be the file that goes to your distributor or goes on, I will take it and put it on a lacquer or, like that's that if it gets approved. And then if we do revisions, there's always right after that, or actually I've switched it around. Before the production master, there's a revision number. So R01, R02. And if there wasn't a revision, that just doesn't.
Now, would it say like R03 base up, or would it just say R03?
No, I just, for the sanity of everybody and the length of file names, it's just R0, and that tells me when we finalize something exactly what I know. I always have a record of what goes into production.
So if you're talking to a client and they're saying, the vocal's still low, and you're like, really? I just boosted. Are you sure you're commenting on the right one? And you just say, are you looking at R03?
Yeah,
and
that's
then they can do that.
Yeah. So it keeps, I want it short, but I want it enough that we can pinpoint exactly what we're doing. And then when the project gets finalized, I indicate which one went into production.
Now, the name, since it sounds like a pretty long name, since it's not just like, Fire is the name of the track or something.
Yeah.
Fire V1 or something. Do you find that in some places it all gets truncated and you can't see, like on a Dropbox, I imagine maybe it's hard to see the R03 or something.
That's the only downfall of this system. But if you just click on it, you can see the nomenclature for everything of it expanded. I do get some pushback from other engineers about some of that. And for me, it's the only way that I can archive things appropriately and be able to call on things in a moment's notice, so it's
it's the best of both worlds. It's like, it's clear enough for artists to communicate back to you, but it's also clear enough for your finding it a year from now and being able to know exactly which file was which.
And to make the file even longer, right at the end, I always put sample rate, bit rate.
Right.
Of the file in the file name. So you don't even have to go look. It's just there. So you can tell what's the high res, what's going to CD, what is all the way down, the different resolutions.
And that's cool. And you mentioned the AES white paper, I think. So just give a shout out to that for the Rockstars. I think there is a file out there that tells you what to do if you want to go
there's an AES white paper that was actually George and Chuck Ainley were on the board, but when you look at the paper, it's like, there's like 50 people on it, but George Massenberg was on it. And I think it's Chuck Ainley here. And I may get that wrong. I apologize.
No, I think that's correct. Actually.
And the paper goes into like how it was really designed to like, how are we sending stems, in the production world, and how do we label those how do we label folder sets? And this paper kind of like spells out, like they just said, like, we don't have a standard for this. How do we create a standard? And they tried, like in the film production world and in like, especially when you're dealing with like immersive audio, like how do we label all these things to then send to different engineers back and forth as you're working on things? And I kind of stole all that from that paper. I've created my own like smaller, different iteration of it. With like dates and like the larger file flow sets that I make, that not the things that I'm sending to clients, but I always include a specific date. And then I also have what's called a project ID. That's just a number that every project gets that is also becomes my invoice number. Mm-hmm. So like if I have to go look up an invoice, I can then coordinate that number with the file set on the folder.
That's
for
cool.
Everything.
That's
so
cool.
It's really, really efficient. And that's why I can call things up at a moment's notice. If somebody says, hey, I need my master. I don't have my masters from 4 years ago. Can I, and that's just a service that like when you I don't charge for that, anything like that. I mean, I kind of think it's kind of included in my actual mastering rate. It's kind of like this future proof that I do, but I think it's just a courtesy, from a mastering side. Now, I think if I was a mix engineer, that might be a different story because of the amount.
Maybe a little more complex.
Yeah. But from a mastering standpoint, I feel like that's part of I always say that we're the librarian of the project, or we're the archivist of that project. I look at Larry Crane is like the oversees the executive of Elliott Smith, and I mean, it was such a cool responsibility, to be the archivist of that estate, and so like I try to organize myself in that line of thinking, and I think about there are other artists that we talk about sometimes in the show, Frank Zappa and that catalog, the Grateful Dead. There's artists with huge catalogs that somebody has to be archiving to make sure that the stuff stays organized. Yes. Yeah. And I do that with everything I work with. And it's really, it's really nerdy and fun. And I don't know, other people may say that's not fun, but my brain. Well, it does give the client that you're working with a sense of feeling important too. Yeah. Like if I was to come back to you and you had done a project for me 5 years ago, and you were like, "Oh, I've got it. Yeah, here it is." That would probably make me feel like, "Wow, I'm that important." Yeah, which is a good feeling. And again, it's that process of connecting with clients and making sure everybody feels great. So let me jump to this question. This is a question I like to ask all of our guests on the podcast. We're going to take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back in time, and you find young Duncan, who's I don't know, thinking about going off to school and getting a master's degree or who knows what. But you say, "Listen, dude, I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing that you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day." What advice would you go back and give yourself if you could? I would tell myself at the end of my master's degree, I was really scared of missing opportunities. And I overworked myself and burned myself out a bit. And I would tell my past self to be like, it's okay to miss some things, to really work hard to do some big things slowly. Right. And it's okay. Like I would tell myself it's okay, cause I didn't feel like it was at the time. Like I was worried I was going to miss, like I always wanted to like I need to gain this skill and I need to do this and I need to put so much pressure on, not that, I guess it's all it boils down to don't put so much pressure on yourself. Like you're doing just fine, yeah, no, I agree. I think about that a lot, where there are certain elements of what we do in our process that require a great deal of focus and dedication. And, you got to put your nose down and go forward in a straight line. And that means inevitably not taking a right-hand turn and a left-hand turn along the way. And you might have to let go of certain opportunities. For me, I mean, here I am launching a video podcast. It's not like that's a brand new idea. Video podcast has been a great place to be for a while, but I had to accept that, I got to stay focused on putting the show out and keeping it consistent and making sure it sounds great, despite the occasional time where I mute my microphone. We'll find out what I did about that. But accepting that, okay, I'll get to it when I get to it. There's probably a quality of that for you too. Yeah. I think I always relate everything back to what I do exactly is in the mastering world, you get what I finish goes out and maybe makes a bunch of copies. So if there's something in that's an issue, you're going to get you could have a mistake on it, so there's pressure there, and you have to remind yourself, if you don't relieve that pressure, you'll never actually sign off on it. Yeah, I won't. Yeah, you just keep going back and fix. Yeah, it's making records that are never finished; they're just abandoned. Right. Yeah. That's the age old. I love that quote. I got that quote from this podcast, I think. Did you? Yeah. I don't remember where I heard it. It's like the art is never finished; it's only abandoned. Yeah. And that's a great. It's so true. Great reminder, and it really gives us permission to just go ahead and do stuff. Yeah.
Well, dude, thank you so much for being on the podcast with us. Let the rock stars know, where can they go find out more about you,
Sure.
Voltage Exchange? How should they connect with you if they're ready to make their next hit record?
I don't. I have a personal Facebook, but I don't. I've sort of abandoned Facebook, but I have a studio Instagram, at thevoltageexchange.com. Or sorry, at the voltage. The Instagram is at the Voltage Exchange.
Okay, yeah.
And then my website, you can contact me either place. I'm on and my website is just thevoltageexchange.com. Both places are great to get in contact with me. I'm happy to answer DMs and emails appropriately. And
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm thinking that maybe I want to come over there and just listen to some vinyl records with you.
let's do it.
And maybe
man.
it's time to release Skadoosh on vinyl. And Rockstars, what would you think about that? You want to come to Nashville and we go hang out and go to Duncan's and go watch the robot cutting lathe do its thing?
That would be an absolute pleasure.
I mean, I love the fact that it's called a Sillitoe.
Well, actually, the thing is it's we didn't get into the story of I flew to Australia to pick up the machine, and the guy who created the machine is called James. His name is James Sillitoe, and I thought that Sillitoe was sort of like a stage name.
Yeah.
And he goes, "No, that's actually my last name."
That's awesome.
So it's like I was like, "That's amazing. That's incredible. This makes this even more special." So
awesome,
yeah.
dude. Well, thanks for joining us,
Yeah.
Rockstars. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment on below and let us know what you thought, and if you got any questions for Duncan or for me, and we'll try and jump in there and answer them.
Thank you so much, man.
All right, man. Good to see you. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Isotope, Native Instruments, Roswell Pro Audio, and Atom Audio. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes. At isotope.com and nativeinstruments.com, use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in our show notes. These are all things that I highly recommend for your studio because they're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is new for us here, and it's a great way for you to help support this show, so I greatly appreciate it. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and for listening. My name is Lid Shaw, and I'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.